With every new NFL season, we have teams who come out of rebuilds and also teams who enter rebuilds. And with this year following suit probably more than any other seasons, I wanted to give you guys 5 different teams who should be considering a full-time rebuild. Now before I get into the top 5 teams, I did want to offer you guys a couple honorable mentions. I have 2 teams who should be considering a rebuild of some sort of extent, those teams being the Minnesota Vikings and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both those teams have solid rosters, but overall have a bunch of question marks in key positions. Now I'm not quite sure if I want these teams to go into full rebuilds. Rather, I would say they should just go into kind of a soft reboot. But with that being said, let's get into the top 5. These 5 teams are not going to be in any particular order, but my 5th ranked team is going to be the Las Vegas Raiders. Currently, the Las Vegas Raiders sit 2nd in the AFC West, ahead of teams like the Los Angeles Chargers and the Denver Broncos. Now with that being said, they currently have a net point differential of -49, which means they've scored 112 points this year and have given up 161. And currently, this is one of the worst offenses in the entire NFL. Now I've made a full 10-minute video regarding the Las Vegas Raiders and what I think they should do in terms of their future. So if you do want to check that video out, make sure to check out my channel where you can see the rest of that video. But what I will do is briefly cover a couple of things that I think this team can do moving forward, as well as also look at what they've done this season. So far this year, this is one of the worst offenses in the entire NFL. They currently average 16 points a game, which ranks them 30th, as well as they average 284.1 yards a game, which ranks them at number 27. And it's not like this team is scoring a bunch of points either. Like I said, 16 points a game and 1.6 touchdowns per game, which ranks them 27th. This is a bottom 5 offense in the entire NFL, and it's not helped by their defense much either. Currently, the defense is giving up 23 points a game, which ranks them 22nd in the league. And sure, you can give them a bit of credit for taking a couple of steps forward this year, but they've definitely not been a dominant unit by no means. And truth be told, there's a lot of good pieces on this roster. Me personally, I don't think this team needs to go into a full-blown rebuild, but I think moving on from pieces like Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs, Jimmy Garoppolo are definitely within the books of possibility. For starters, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is not a good quarterback. Despite his winning record in San Francisco, we all know why he was winning so many games. 90% of NFL fans already knew this, and so you would think a front office like the Raiders would also understand this. He's good at what he does, and what he is a game manager. And this Raiders roster does not need a game manager. They need a Patrick Mahomes level quarterback if they want to go anywhere. That being said, they have some nice pieces along the offensive line. I do think their rookie class from this past draft is going to end up being very good. There are some solid pieces along this defense, obviously the big one being Max Crosby, and so that's why I don't think they need to go into a full-blown rebuild, but getting rid of this coaching staff, getting a new quarterback and some new weapons definitely needs to happen. My 4th team that I want to talk about in this video is going to be the New Orleans Saints. Currently, the Saints sit at 3-4, and even though they're very likely to win the NFC South, it is not because this team is very good. It is more the fact that the NFC South is extremely mid. Currently, the Falcons actually hold first place, and they've only scored 115 points this year. Meanwhile, the Saints have scored 133 points, but the defense has given up 127, and they're actually the only team in the NFC South to have a positive net point differential, so you'd think they'd be winning the division, but because they've been so damn inconsistent, they haven't. Now, one positive about the Saints team is that they actually have a very good defense. Currently, this defense is giving up 18.1 points per game, which ranks them 7th best in the league. This defense also allows only 285.7 yards a game, which would rank them at number 4, and for most other metrics, they rank within the top 10. But what isn't good about this team? Their offense. And I know people say that defenses win you championships, but defenses can only carry you to a championship if they are like all-time great defenses. And unfortunately for this team, the Saints defense is not all-time great. They have some good pieces, guys like Marshawn Lattimore, Tyrann Mathieu, some decent pass rushers, but again, this is not a defense to write home about that we're going to be talking about in 10 years. So for this team to really be successful, they have to have at least a top 15 offense, and as we sit here through 7 weeks, this offense has been basically abysmal. They score the 21st fewest points a game, and they average 1.7 touchdowns per game. Now, the reason why this team should consider a full rebuild is for a number of reasons. For starters, their current roster right now is not good enough to win a championship. Sure, they can probably get into the playoffs, but at best, they're 2nd round exits, and that's best case scenario. And with the way it's looking currently, it looks like they're going to actually be kind of hitting their worst case scenario, which is that this team is going to consistently be up there in the playoffs, but not consistently make it. And regardless of if they make it or not, they're not going to have a top 10 pick. They're going to kind of sit between that 15 to 20 range, which means they can't really add elite top 10 talent within a draft to add to a roster that's already a little bit older. And like every NFL team, they do have some young guys, obviously. Guys like Brian Bresee as well as Chris Olave have kind of been their young guys for this year. And I think moving forward, those guys are going to be big deals for this team. But I think similar to the Raiders, you have to fix a lot of problems. Offensive line problems, head coaching problems, quarterback problems, the whole thing. I would blow it up, get under the cap space, but it is the Saints, so I kind of doubt that's going to happen. Now moving on to our 3rd team, which is going to be the New York Giants. Now before anyone says that I'm overreacting to their current situation, let's be honest, even if this team was hitting their stride and actually kind of doing good things, could this currently assembled Giants roster contend with guys like the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the San Francisco 49ers? Probably not, barring Daniel Jones actually being a great quarterback. But as it currently sits, this roster is in shambles. They currently sit at 2-5. They have a net point differential of -89, and statistically, this is arguably the worst offense in the entire NFL. They average the least amount of points per game at 12.1. They average the 29th least amount of yards with 278.4. They average 1.1 touchdown a game, which is 32nd in the league. And this defense that was supposed to be kind of good good has looked very bad in most games. Sure, they had a good game against Buffalo, and they looked really good against the Commanders, but I'm not going to forget the 5 other games they played. They currently are giving up 24.9 points per game, which would rank them at number 23. They gave up 351.4 yards a game, which ranks them at number 23 as well. And let's be honest, there's not a ton of hope for this roster. They have some nice pieces here and there, guys like Bobby Okereke, Kayvon Thibodeau, Andrew Thomas, John Michael Schmitz. Those are all nice pieces. But when you're giving Daniel Jones the contract that he just got this offseason, you're extremely handicapped because you really can't acquire a bunch of pieces to help fix your roster. Sure, they can acquire a piece or two in the draft, but this is a team that needs to start winning now. They have been horrible for probably about the last 6-7 years, and last year was their first time of actually having any sort of success, and the thought was that we can build upon this and actually be a competent team this year and potentially contend for the NFC. But as it sits, that's not happening, and the way it's looking, it's not going to happen in the near future. So you really can't sit there and wait on draft picks to be good. Sure, they can definitely take some pieces that will help them in the immediate future, and I guarantee you that will happen, but if you're relying on rookies to take you out of the gutters, I'm sorry, I don't see that happening. And they really can't go out there in free agency and pick up a bunch of guys. Sure, they can get a piece here and there. I'm sure they can rework some contracts to make a little bit more money, but I have a ton of doubts about this roster, and it all stems from Daniel Jones. The next team I want to talk about is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers. Now again, I do want to reiterate that this is in no particular order, and I want to emphasize I don't think the Chargers need to go into a full-blown rebuild, but a big-time reboot definitely is what this team needs. Let's get this out of the way. Brandon Staley is terrible. He's a defensive-minded head coach and has arguably one of the worst defenses in the entire NFL. Currently, this defense is giving up 25.8 points per game, which ranks them 25th in the league. They give up 406.8 yards a game, which would rank them at 31st. And it's not like he's a great game manager either. So what does he really do good? I can't tell you. Probably kiss the GM and owner's ass, because Lord knows how he still has a job. Now, looking at the positive side of things for the LA Chargers, you have Justin Herbert. Keenan Allen is still a stud, and Kellen Moore has really rejuvenized this offense in some really positive ways. I'm not a huge fan of Kellen Moore, and I've been critical of him in the past, but as it stands, this offense is averaging 24 points a game, which ranks them the 11th best in the NFL, and in most metrics they rank within the top 15, which is sort of to be expected when you have Justin Herbert and some of the pieces along this offense. And once they can fully incorporate Austin Eckler into their game plan, it's definitely going to help them out a ton more. As well as this offensive line has done some good things at times. Rashawn Slater is obviously a stud. Zion Johnson has done some decent things here and there. The right side of the offensive line is definitely their weak spot, and I do think they should look to address that in this offseason. And hopefully Quentin Johnson eventually can be a competent receiver, because as it stands right now, he's done basically nothing, and I think he has a bunch of potential that needs to get tapped into. So for this roster, I think the offense should be kind of left the way it is. Sure, add some pieces along the offensive line, and maybe add a receiver alongside Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, especially if Quentin Johnson can't get it together. But that's not the main issue for this team. What really needs to be addressed is the coaching staff outside of the offensive coordinator, as well as its defense. If it is me, and I hate to say this, I'd probably hire Kellen Moore to be my head coach. I would fire Brandon Staley today. I would hire a defensive coordinator who likes to blitz a lot, and I would just let that defense just take a lot of risks, because there's some good pieces along this defense, but it's not a completely great defense. Again, there's a lot of good pieces, guys like Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Asante Samuel, Derwin James, but then you have a bunch of underperforming players to go along with them. I think you can kind of make up for their faults by blitzing a little bit more, and I think you keep Kellen Moore as your head coach because he can bring his youth into this offense and bring in kind of a veteran coaching staff to help alongside him. But our number one team, and again, no particular order, is going to be the Denver Broncos. I will say if there was any team that needs to do a full-blown reboot, it would probably be the Broncos, because man, they are in an absolute shitstorm. Let's get this out of the way. The offense has looked better at times. I will still say that this is an offense that is kind of lackluster, but they're not a bottom 5 unit like they were last year. They're somewhere between that 15 to 20 range, which still isn't good, but it's definitely a nice step from last year. Currently, he has about 1,500 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions on the season, and he's definitely taken a nice step forward from last year. Hell, last year he had 16 touchdowns the whole season, and he's only 3 touchdowns away from it 7 games into the season. So I do think Sean Payton has done a nice job of adapting his offensive scheme to what Russell Wilson is good at, but with that being said, it's still a poorly constructed roster. The defense is arguably the worst in the entire NFL. The offensive line that is around Russell Wilson is horrible. The run game is kind of inconsistent, and that's kind of due to the fact that Sean Payton just doesn't run the ball a whole lot. He currently runs the ball about 22 times a game, which is the 29th lowest in the league, and when they do run, they're not scoring a lot of touchdowns. They average 0.1 rushing touchdowns a game, which is the 31st worst in the league. So it's basically all on the back of Russell Wilson, which for better or for worse, I'm not too sure. It goes to show you that Sean Payton is just not willing to run the ball a whole lot and trust Russell Wilson more than he does his offensive line and running backs. Now in the receiving game, it's a little bit better. I wouldn't say it's been great, but guys like Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton have had some nice games here and there, but those guys are mediocre number 1 receivers at best. I don't think Jerry Jeudy nor Courtland Sutton are true number 1 receivers. I view Courtland Sutton as sort of a number 3 receiver, and I view Jerry Jeudy as a very solid number 2 receiver. But the Broncos, for whatever reason, value these guys as number 1 options. But let's get away from the offense, because again, that's sort of been more of the kind of positive thing. What has really been the headline story for this Broncos team has just been how bad this defense has been. Do I need to mention the Miami Dolphins game? This is a defensive unit that basically ranks in the bottom 5 of almost every statistical category. And outside of just the statistics, statistics of this defense, let's actually just talk about the personnel. Pat Surtain, Kareem Jackson, and Justin Simmons are really the only great players. Zach Allen, Alex Singleton, Josie Jewell have played good at times, and DJ Jones sometimes has some good moments, but man, it's bad. For starters, the scheme they run is just horrible. Players don't look comfortable in it, they don't look like they know what they're doing, and when they do know what they're doing, they're not making plays. This is a horrible defense, straight up. And for the Broncos, it's going to be very difficult to get out of the situation. Now, the good news for the Broncos is that they do have their first round pick this year, but they won't have their second round pick. But outside of that, you just look at their contract situation, they gave a shit ton of money to Russell Wilson. And again, I don't think Russell Wilson has been all that bad this year, but he's an aging quarterback on a team that needs to go into a rebuild. They don't have the assets to build around Russell Wilson. And barring the fact that they may be able to trade Russell Wilson, or potentially Russell Wilson will be willing to take a pay cut, I don't really see how this team goes into that rebuild, or how they could potentially go into free agency to make some moves to fix this roster. Because there's a lot of pieces that need to get fixed, not only on this defense, but also on this offense. And to be honest with you, I don't think Sean Payton signed up for what he's gotten into. I think he thought that he had a good roster already established and that all this team needed was some new head coaches, but I think he's quickly learning that not even his great scheme can fix this team's issues. But that is all I have for you guys in this video. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button for me, as well as if you did enjoy it, make sure to send it to your family and friends who might enjoy NFL and NBA content as well. But I love you guys. Peace.